Welcome to Bilingual Book Buddies podcast and webcast. Bilingual Book Buddies is dedicated to promoting bilingual books for children and sharing insights from authors, illustrators, editors, agents, and anyone involved in bringing these stories to life. I'm Claudia Sloan. I'm one of three co-hosts of Bilingual Book Buddies. I'm an artist who also writes and illustrates books for children. I'll write from my own experiences and adventures, and I include themes of wellness, Latinx culture, modern fairy tales, STEAM, and sports. In fact, my latest picture book is a sports picture book, and it is a dream come true because it was a collaboration with my favorite NBA and WNBA professional basketball teams, the Phoenix Suns and the Phoenix Mercury. And it's bilingual. And now let's welcome my co-hosts, Silvia Lopez and Alicia Salazar.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Silvia Lopez. I am a Cuban-American children's book author. I have about 15 books published, traditional publishing. I have several more for the education market, and I have 3 more coming out in 2026. So I was a school librarian for many, many years and went into writing as a natural progression of things, being among children and books. And I love, most of my books are bilingual, and I love writing bilingual books.
Hi, my name is Alicia Salazar, and I'm a Mexican-American children's book writer. I'm the author of the Camilla the Star series, as well as Trolls, Loch Ness Monster, and the upcoming Cascarones, an Easter surprise. Thank you for joining us. Now Claudia will introduce our guest.
Duncan Tonatiuh is an award-winning author and illustrator. He grew up in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, and graduated from Parsons School of Design and Eugene Long College in New York City. His artwork is inspired by pre-Columbian art, particularly that of the Mixtec codices. His aim is to create images and stories that honor the past, but that are relevant to people, especially children's nowadays. Duncan, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here with us today. Duncan, can you walk us through your journey to becoming an author and illustrator of bilingual books for children?
Sure. Yes, so hi, everyone. My name is Duncan, or in Spanish, everyone pronounces it Duncan, so you can call me Duncan, you can call me Duncan. And I write and I illustrate books. I've been doing it for like 15 years, a little bit more now. And I'm working currently, the Vida will be my 19th book that will be available. But I was interested in both writing and drawing since I was a kid. I was born in Mexico City, but then when I was about 8 years old, my family moved to a smaller city called San Miguel de Allende. It's a very pretty city in central Mexico. My dad was tired of the pollution, of the traffic of Mexico City, so we ended up moving. And when I moved to San Miguel, I didn't know the kids in my neighborhood. I didn't know the kids in my school. This is before everyone had smartphones and the internet. We didn't have a TV in my house because my parents had sold it when we moved. But there was a library at my school. And so I would borrow a lot of books. They had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure. I actually found one of them. There were these like little chapter books, and I would borrow one, and a few days later, read it. A few days later, take it back and read another one. And that's when I discovered reading for the fun of it, just as something to do for pleasure, to entertain myself in the evenings. And then that was when I first started thinking that maybe I could be a writer. And when I had assignments at my school, different homeworks that had to do with writing, especially if it had to do with writing a story, I would get carried away and I would write a lot. And if they were like, write a page, I would write like 5 and get really into it. And around that same time is also when I became interested in drawing because my cousins, after I moved to San Miguel, some cousins from Mexico City came to visit me a few months later. And when they came to visit me, they brought comic books like Spider-Man, like the X-Men. And I had never seen comic books. And I got really excited when I discovered them. I started saving my allowance that my parents gave me to buy my own comics. But then I tried making my own. My cousins and I would usually go to my grandma's house over the holidays, during summer break, during winter break. And we would all, we would bring our comic books there and trade them and read them. But we would try and make our own. We would grab pieces of paper and fold them in half, old notebooks, and draw our own characters, make up our own supervillains, our own stories. And that's when I started drawing. And it's just something that I continued doing. As I got older, I became interested in other things also. When my parents bought a TV, I really liked like the anime, the Japanese cartoons that were on TV, and I would try and draw in that style with really big eyes, like manga or anime. Um, and different things. I got interested in political cartoons and but I always kept writing and drawing. Um, and then I did elementary school, middle school, and a year of high school in San Miguel. But then I ended up moving to the United States and going to high school in the United States. My father was American, so I'm both Mexican and American. I have family in both countries, and and I didn't like my high school in San Miguel. And a cousin of mine, he thought that I would really like his high school because it was very arts oriented. And so I ended up moving to his high school in Massachusetts, and I did a lot of painting, a lot of black and white photography. I took a poetry class, a creative writing class, and I was very happy at that school. And afterwards, I went to a design school, to an art school in New York City, to Parsons School of Design, and to Eugene Lang College, which is a liberal arts college, both part of the New School University, where I could take a lot of literature classes, writing classes, drawing classes. I could pursue all these things that I was interested in. Um, but then as I spent more time in the United States, I began to miss some of the things that were always around me growing up in Mexico. I began to miss the food, the music, different traditions. Um, and so I became more interested in the art of Mexico and the culture of Mexico. Um, my last year at my university, I had to have a senior project and I wasn't quite sure what to do. I thought maybe I could do kind of like a small graphic novel, a comic book. And I ended up making it about a friend of mine named Sergio, who I met in New York, who's from Mexico, but he's Mixtec, which is an indigenous group from southern Mexico, from states like Oaxaca, like Guerrero. And the thing that struck me when I met him is that he would speak his indigenous language with his coworkers, with his cousins. And so I thought it'd be interesting to do a story of how he came from this small village in Mexico to this large city in the United States. I thought that that could be a good senior project, a good senior thesis. And one of the first things that I did was go to my university's library and look up Mixtec artwork. And then, because I thought it'd be cool to have Mixtec artwork inform the look of the project, and I found these kinds of drawings. These are drawings that the Mixtec people made more than 500 years ago. There's modern day Mixtecs, but the Mixtecs were also a civilization like the Aztecs, like the Maya, that built pyramids, they built cities, and they made books. They made these very long books, these long strips that could be folded like an accordion. And we now call these books they made, we usually refer to them as codices. But they had a very unique way of drawing, very flat, very stylized, very geometric. And so I decided that I wanted to do a modern day codex of my friend's story, of Sergio's story. And that's how I came up with my illustration style. This is actually my senior project. I called it Journey of a Mixteco. And it folds out like that, like an accordion, like a really long book. And it's all drawn in that style, the way I draw ears, hands, feet, everyone's always in profile. It's inspired by those drawings that the Mixtec people made. And a professor at my university really liked this project that I was working on, and she introduced me to an editor that published children's books. She thought that he might like my work. And when he saw my project, he said, this is more for adults, and the way it folds is kind of weird. But if we receive a story that a different author wrote that would work well with your illustrations, I'd like to work with you. I'll give you a call. And I said, that would be amazing. But I like writing too. I'm taking all these writing classes. Maybe I could write the story. Maybe I could write the story. And he said, sure, we could try that. Do you know much about picture books? And I told him that I didn't because, I'd been interested in being an artist, both a writer and a visual artist since I was a teenager, since I was a kid, but I always thought that I was going to do things for adults. I never considered doing books for children. I thought maybe I'll be a novelist or write for a newspaper or a painter, and my paintings will hang in a gallery, but I never considered doing books for children. And then he said, he told me some things about picture books, that they have a title page, a copyright page. He said, my suggestion to you is to make your protagonist, your main character, an animal or maybe a young person, someone that kids can relate to. And he said, if you write something, you can send it to me. Here's my card. It has my number. It has my email. And so sometime later, while I was still finishing my senior project, I thought of this story about two cousins, one that lives in a rural community in Mexico, one that lives in an urban center in the United States, and they send letters back and forth to each other. But it was the first picture book I'd ever written. So I thought, well, kids like Dr. Seuss, I should make a rhyme like Dr. Seuss. So I wrote my story in my notebook, typed on my computer, made sure everything rhymed. I emailed it to his editor. And some days later, he responded and he said, I like this story you sent me about these two cousins in different countries. I think it could make a good book. And, from your drawings that I've seen before, I think you would do a good job illustrating it. But then he said, but no rhyming, please. Your rhymes are not very good. I was pretty disappointed when he said that, but I reread the story and they were pretty forced. I can pull off rhyming for a page or two, but not for an entire book. But I rewrote the story and I sent it back to him and I revised it and we sent it back and forth several times, but eventually it became my first book, Dear Primo, a letter to my cousin, or there's a Spanish version of it now called Dear Primo, una carta para ti. And that sort of opened this world of making children's books and picture books. Like I said, this is the first of 19 books that I've made. Most of them I wrote and illustrated myself. There have been a few books that I've illustrated for other authors, but I'm primarily an author and illustrator. And almost all the ones that I've written have been um, edited by the same editor, by a man named Howard Reeves that I met from Abrams that I met when I was still in college, and we still have this very good working relationship. And all my books are very different from one another, but some are fiction, some are nonfiction. But one thing they have in common is they have to do a lot with Mexican culture, Mexican American culture, most of them. Um, and
And your art style is just so unique. So that was a very brilliant, genius decision, I think, to adapt. Obviously, you were attracted to it. You liked that style uh, to be able to do it. But I think that was a very wise career decision at that point, um,
Thank you. Yeah, I
whether
mean,
you were conscious of it or not.
yeah, I mean, and like as I mentioned, the thing that got me into drawing and excited as a kid were comic books, was anime, manga, different things. But then as an adult, years later, after I lived in the United States for several years and I saw that kind of artwork again, I was really struck by it. Because I saw these kinds of drawings as a kid, like I remember one of my textbooks when I was in elementary school had a picture of the Aztec calendar with the sun in the middle. Or there in San Miguel, there's an artisans market, and sometimes they sell like codex-like crafts. But that wasn't what excited me as a kid. I was interested in other things. But years later, as an adult, when I saw these drawings again, I was really like taken in by them and by how geometric and stylized they were. And I wanted to draw in a similar style. One thing that I do a little differently is that I put a lot of textures in my illustrations. I do a kind of digital collage where you can see a lot, like the jeans look like real jeans or the shirt looks like real shirt.
I
So
love
hopefully
them. The
that's an interesting
hair, you use
combination.
real hair.
Yeah, yeah, the hair, all the different parts of the book, the paper here in the background's like a real
Mhm.
crinkly piece of paper. And so hopefully that's an interesting combination of something that's, reminiscent of this ancient art, but also maybe a little bit different and, maybe something that kids can kind of relate to, connect to.
Obviously, with your so many stories, which one or which ones are those that are dear to your heart, that were based perhaps on a very special personal experience or anecdote, unique experiences or achievements?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, this one, Dear Primo is not about me personally, but it's definitely very much inspired by my observations. And so, for example, a lot of things that Carlitos, one of the primos does, are things that I did as a kid. I would always play football in this little dirt field right by my house. Um, or I would love playing with trompos and canicas as a kid. These are all things that I did growing up in San Miguel. Or, I would always celebrate um, the Day of the Dead or the Posadas in December, where there's always a piñata at the end. But then when I moved to the US, and especially when I lived in New York for a while, I lived in a neighborhood called Sunset Park, which is in Brooklyn. And it has this great view of the Manhattan kind of skyline. But when I moved there, it was the middle of winter. But there's a big Mexican community, a big Latino community, Mexican, Puerto Rican, from other countries, but mostly Mexican. Um, and the thing that really struck me when I moved there were the children, because the children in the neighborhood looked just like the kids that I had grown up with in San Miguel. It's like the same face. But there in Sunset Park, they were all wearing big jackets. There was snow on the ground. You could see like the Manhattan skyline in the background. They were all speaking English. Um, and where I grew up in San Miguel, like the streets are cobblestone streets. The buildings are a lot shorter, but very colorful. Everyone speaks Spanish. So to me, it was sort of like the same child, but in a different environment. And so a lot of things that the other primo does, the other cousin, Charlie does, are inspired by the kids that I saw in Sunset Park, like playing basketball and eating pizza and celebrating different holidays like Thanksgiving and Halloween. So this one is not about me personally, but it's definitely about kind of my observations. And one thing that I'd like to say about it is that, while making the book is about the differences, but I realize it's about the similarities also. Because, one plays football and the other one basketball, but they both like sports. They both like cheesy food. They both like spending time with their friends, with their families, celebrating different holidays, different fiestas. And I feel that regardless where in the world kids are from or where they live, they're more alike than different. And so hopefully that's the message that comes through with this book.
I think that's a message that is very important today. So I know that book is one of your earlier, so actually it's your very first into picture books, and it's a few years back. But I think that message is so, so important today, and it's the evergreen message.
Tell us a little bit about your books, the language that is in them, and how you go about choosing and translating them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. Yeah, and you can see in some of the books I've used like words from Nahuatl, or for example, I did a book about capoeira, which has some words in Portuguese, but a lot of them also have, are in English with words in Spanish. So yeah, all my books have come out in English, and some of them have some words in Spanish. So like Dear Primo, for example, which is the first one, it's in English, but it has throughout some words in Spanish. And you can see them highlighted, like, um, Rio and cohetes and different things in the story that for a person that doesn't speak Spanish from context, they can kind of figure out what's going on. Um, Soon after I started making books, people would ask me if they were available in Spanish. And when my first book came out in 2010, um, um, when they first came out, they weren't available in Spanish. It took a while for my books to be available in Spanish. I think my publishing company that I've worked with mostly, they were a little skeptical. They weren't quite sure how to market it, how to sell it, even though there seemed to be a lot of interest. At least I would notice because people would ask me often, different teachers, different librarians. There's a lot of dual language programs in schools in the United States. And obviously, there's lots and lots of Spanish speakers also. I think it's like what is it? Maybe like the third country in the world with the most Spanish speakers,
Yes.
the United States. Um, so, but it took a while for them to become available. A couple years back, like in 2020, my publishing company became much more open to it, and with all my most recent books since 2020, I believe, or 2021. Been available in both like English and Spanish. They come out simultaneously in both languages. Um, and books that I had done in the past. So, for example, this one, Dear Primo, which came out in 2010, this year there was a Spanish version of it that came out, Dear Primo, una carta para ti. Um, so, usually before I would always write in English. And sometimes if I would get stuck in my story, like I would rewrite it in Spanish. That sometimes helped me trying to figure out kind of the story better. Um, Nowadays that I know that there'll be, both English and Spanish editions of it coming out, sometimes I'll alternate between, I'll start writing one language and maybe switch to the other one. Um, um, but yeah, that's been a little bit of my kind of my process with that, my experience with that. And I guess with the indigenous languages, there's some stories that I've done, like for example, The Prince and the Warrior, La Princesa y el Guerrero, which is a story from Mesoamerican times that takes place in the central valley of Mexico where people would have spoken Nahuatl. So it made sense to me that if I wanted to include words that were in a different language, to have them in Nahuatl. And I like including words in other languages when possible, because sometimes there's words that are hard to translate, that you can't quite convey that meaning fully. Or also sometimes, there's I think it's just nice to introduce kind of children that there are all these other languages that are spoken and kind of, let them um, find a little bit about it. In each book, there's kind of slightly different reasons. I did one called Separados Never Equal, Separados No Somos Iguales. And in that one, when I use Spanish in the English version, is when Silvia's mother speaks, because she would always talk to Silvia in Spanish. So I decided that when Silvia's mother is speaking, I would include the text in Spanish because when I had the chance to meet Silvia Mendez, the protagonist of the book, and she recalls how her mom would talk to her in Spanish. So there's kind of slightly different reasons for each book why include other language, but that has been my experience so far.
Thank you, Duncan. And along that line, before we go on to the next question, you have Juego de Libertad, this one here, and you actually have a third language in here because you have Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese in this book. How was that? How do you speak Brazilian Portuguese, or did you have, oh, you do? Okay. How was that received by the editors that at this point you were not going to be doing just only Spanish? You were now doing a third language here, or another language separate from the indigenous languages, but a spoken language in Latin America. Was that favorably received? I'm saying for other authors we have who are also bilingual, but not in Spanish. So how was that experience?
Yeah, so the book, it's available in English with some words in Portuguese. And there's also a Spanish version of it
Right.
available with some words in Portuguese. Hopefully in the future there'll be a Portuguese version of it.
Right.
I speak Portuñol. When I was in college, I studied abroad in Brazil for a semester, and it's very close to Spanish, so I could understand it well. I could speak it all right, but it's not my first language, so I do make mistakes, and there's some words that I probably pronounce wrong and whatnot. But I have a decent idea. And the book is about capoeira, which is something that I like to practice, that I'm interested in. So I had a good amount of knowledge about it and people that I could reach out to ask questions about it that kind of helped me and guided me to good sources of information. So I think in my experience, yeah, my editors have been receptive if there's kind of like a good reason behind it. Um, and to include the words in a different language, to do for example, a full Portuguese version of the book. I could probably write it, but I would definitely need someone to kind of help me copy edit it and make sure that everything's correct. And I mean, with English and Spanish, I make mistakes all the time. So I'm glad there's, people there that can kind of help me check on that a bit. But there hasn't been a Portuguese version of it. I don't know how open a publishing company in the United States would be to publishing a Portuguese book in the United States. I'm not, I know they were skeptical at first in my experience to publish it in Spanish, and there's a lot of
Right.
Spanish, there's a lot more Spanish speakers
Right.
in the
Then there
US
are
than Portuguese
Brazilian,
speakers.
right?
And Portuguese, Brazilian, or Brazilian Portuguese, I mean. Um, so I'm not sure how easy or hard that would be. But I know with Spanish, it's a lot more common, and there's lots of different publishing companies that publish in both English and Spanish.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that question.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, es el turno de Alicia.
Es Alicia.
Um, you talked about being an author and an illustrator, and it seemed like the two paths were kind of combined for you. Was there anything different about your path as an illustrator and your path as an author?
Um, no, I mean, I was always interested in both things, and that the university that I attended, the new school, they had this program called the BAFA, where I could get a BA and a BFA. It was 5 years total. Um, but then I was able to take a lot of, I was interested in a lot of things. So I took like writing classes and literature classes, but also like social studies classes. And then I was also taking like different drawing classes and painting classes, design classes. And so it's a very kind of self-driven program. I kind of had to sort of put it together. I had to have some requirements, but I was able to take a lot of electives, a lot of classes that I was interested in, which I loved because I was kind of a very self-motivated person. Um, um, but since I was a kid, I liked both writing, I liked both drawing, so it just seemed natural later on, as a young adult in college. And then fortunately doing picture books is such a great medium because I get to both write and illustrate. I get to put those things together. It's one of the mediums where you can do both. Um, and most of them, usually I write and illustrate. Um, and the nice thing about, illustrating my own work, my own writing is that I can kind of go back and forth, some I'll write, but I always make like little doodles, trying to imagine what's going to be in each page. Um, then maybe the text is not perfect, but it feels close to done, it feels like there's few edits that are still needed, but it's nothing major. That's when I'll start doing sketches for the entire book. Um, just kind of line drawings for the entire book in black and white. Um, but sometimes while I'm drawing, it'll make me change the text because maybe something that I do in the drawings, then something in the text becomes superfluous. I can kind of cut it out, or maybe something in drawings will make me want to change something from the text. So I can kind of go back and forth between the two, and hopefully that creates for a very seamless, for the drawings and the writing to work together very well. There have been a few instances there have been some instances when I've illustrated other people's writing, and that presents interesting challenges that I've enjoyed too. So for example, there's Child of the Flower Song People that I did with Gloria Mezcua, where I want to bring this other book up really quick. Um, I did this one called Esquivel about this very creative composer. He's kind of considered the godfather of lounge music. He's a Mexican musician. Um, but in this book, she uses a lot of sounds, a lot of onomatopoeia, which is not something that I usually do or I had not done in my books. Um, but so then that presented like a really interesting opportunity for me to do a lot of hand lettering and to try and like draw the words the way, kind of make them look the way they sound. So here it says zone, squiddly diddly squee, dee doop, trying to find kind of like the look of it, kind of look how they sound. So that's the neat thing about illustrating other people's work is that they do things differently. And so that presents challenges. But those challenges can also be opportunities to find kind of new solutions and to discover new things that maybe I wouldn't discover with my own writing.
Okay.
I don't know if
Um,
that answers the question. Maybe I
yeah,
went on a tangent, but
yeah, that definitely answers the question. So you seem like you stumbled onto this a little bit, but your work seems very inspired. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors, especially those that are um, wanting to write bilingual books?
yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely was, there's people that from a lot earlier on, they're very interested in making books for children. And like I said, I was confident that I wanted to be an artist, but I sort of didn't consider doing children's books. And now that I do them, I'm super happy because I get to write and draw. I get to talk about issues that I care about, that I find interesting, that I find important. Um, and there's a lot of things that I really like about doing books for children. I don't think books for children need to have a happy ending, but I do think they need to be hopeful. I think there needs to be something hopeful about them, and I enjoy that about them. I think you need to grab your reader's attention quickly, and I enjoy that challenge too. Um, so I love making picture books, and hopefully I'll continue to do it for a long, long time. Um, in terms of advice, um, well, I would say, for example, maybe to not be so attached, if that makes any sense. When I write a story, not everything I write becomes a book. I get turned down all the time. And I would say that maybe out of every 5, 10 manuscripts that I share with an editor, one will become a book. There's instances when I'll write something, they'll say, I don't know about this, and maybe I'll put it away, and some years later I'll revise it and find a way to turn it into an interesting book. For example, with this one, I'm gonna grab it really quick. With this book, Feather Serpent and the Five Sons, when I first wrote it, it was about all these different myths and legends related to Quetzalcoatl, to the feather serpent. Um, and um, and I wrote it, and I was really excited, and I wrote this manuscript. But when I sent to my editor, he was like, "This is too long. This is too confusing. I don't know about this." And I was disappointed when he said that. I put away. There were other things that I was working on. But some years later, I looked at it again, and I was like, you know what? I think he has a point because I was trying to like cram all these different stories in. I was like, maybe if I just focus on one of the myths, if I focus on this creation myth of how he recuperated the sacred bones of creation to create humans, that could make an interesting picture book. And so eventually it became a picture book. So that's something that happens to me often that, I'll write something and it'll get turned down, and some things don't become books or have not become books. Other things I'll revise later and eventually become books. And I guess that's the other thing I've learned that um, even after a project gets accepted, I know it's going to be revised. I know I'm gonna have to work on it, try and make it better. And it could be frustrating because I put all this effort, all this energy, and I can be very attached to my sentences and my words and things that I wrote. But, if it's a good editor, um, they can see things, they've worked with other people, they've been doing it for a long time, so they can see things that can be problematic or that are not working in a manuscript. Um, and so I know that I'll have to revise it. So I think that's one thing to learn, to kind of know um, that making a book is like a team effort. There's lots of different people, and there's people that bring expertise and knowledge into it. And so I've had a good experience working with my editor. Um, so those are some things I guess I could share. I guess to be patient, to persevere, but to also not be so attached, and to have multiple projects that you're working on.
That's great advice that we hear it, but it's not often enough, and it's hard to. I think when you're starting out, it's hard to detach a little bit from your babies. So thank you for saying it here. And I
Yeah, and
have a
sometimes,
question. Several of your books have received prestigious awards, like the Pura Belpré and the Cyber Medals. For those that are not familiar with those are very prestigious international awards, and not anybody just get them. And so, tell us a little bit about that. Well, congratulations, first of all, because multiple of your books. I have several of your books here. About 5 of them have received either one or two or an honor mention. So just to give people an idea of how many of your books have been awardees. So tell us about the very first one of these big awards that you received. Which one was the book that got it? What was your experience with it? Because obviously it was the first time you received this award, and maybe even a little bit about the creation of that particular piece of work, because obviously when you were creating it, you had no idea that that book would get you your very first big award, and what it meant to you.
Yes, thank you. No, I've been very lucky that I've received a lot of, I've received several awards and many honorable mentions. Um, um, I think the thing that more than anything, what the awards have meant to me is just giving my books a lot of visibility. I think, when I was first starting making books, I couldn't make a living from just the books. I did lots of other things. I babysat and painted houses and walked dogs. I was a wedding photographer assistant. It took a number of years to be able to, nowadays, my full-time job is to write and illustrate books. That's what I do. Um, but it took a while to get there. I had to do several books so that people would kind of become more familiar with my work. And the thing that really helped it were different awards and different honorable mentions. Because I think when people go to a library, when they go to a bookstore and they see that the book has a sticker on it, then they're like, well, people think that this is a good book. There must be something special about this book. And, with the hundreds, with the thousands of books that get published, um, having that sticker really kind of helps it get just stand out. And so, more than anything, that's what I'm very, very grateful in my career is that the different awards that some of my books have received have really kind of been able um, to give visibility to my work. And so that more librarians, the people that I've had, the market where I've had the most success personally is the educational market, is with teachers, with schools, I think they see the cultural aspect. In my work as as important, as valuable, and something that can be used in the classroom, that can be used with their students, um, and that can be used in the library. So that's where I've had the most success. And so these awards, awards like the Pura Belpre, like the Cybert, but many others, the Tomás Rivera, the Americas Award, the Jane Addams, some of them, a couple of my books were um, um, received the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's Book Award, or were included in that list. So, that just kind of it just helps people find out about the book.
Do you
And so
remember
that's
which one was your very, very first one? It's been too long
well,
ago.
Dear Primo got an honorable mention. For example, the Pura Belpre, I've only received the actual medal, the actual award once. But over the years, I've received 10 honorable mentions.
Mhm.
Most of them for illustration, but a couple for writing also, which I'm very grateful for. I did a book called Funny Bones, and that received the Cybert Award, which is for nonfiction books, for informational books. Um, but for example, the one that won the Pura Belpre Award is called Diego Rivera, His World and Ours. And yeah, and it was very it was a wonderful experience, and like it was my second book, so it was very early in my career too. And it was at a point when it was challenging, where I still wasn't able to kind of make a living from just making books. And so to receive this award and for so many people to find out about it was like a huge boost to be able to continue on this path of making and of writing and illustrating books as a career, as a living, for a living.
And one more last thing about that. So, did you get a phone call? Did it tell you in advance? How did the news get to you? Like, just walk us a little bit through that moment of the very first one. Do you remember?
Yeah, they called me, and I'm a bit of a robot. My wife makes fun of me, because I'm very kind of like even tempered, when something bad happens, but also when something good happens. So I probably didn't sound that like, like for example, one time we were walking back to our car and it had a dent in it. And my wife's like, oh my God, who did this? And I was like, oh, that's so terrible. You know, Unfortunately, actually, it wasn't even our car. It looked just like ours. But But same thing with with the award, I got this call and all the committees there, and I was like, oh, thank you so much, my inner excitement, maybe I don't project it as outwardly as other people, but it's been incredibly rewarding. Definitely at the moment, but I think also now that I've been doing it for a number of years, I think, uh, maybe when I was a little younger, I didn't kind of realize the dimension of it. I think now that I've been kind of making more books and more familiar with it and with the industry and had the opportunity to meet lots of other authors and illustrators and hear about their journey and everything, that's when I kind of, now that I'm hopefully a little bit wiser, I've really kind of come to learn just how amazing all those moments were and what a great, great honor it was.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you for answering. And that's something also for us and everybody else is starting their journeys to aspire to. So you are an inspiration to all of us. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
answer. I believe Silvia has the next question. This episode will be continued. Thank you. Este episodio continuará. Gracias.